IRIS Bitesize resource on effective multi-agency adult support and protection conferences, which are also commonly known as case conferences. This resource will help you understand the purpose of case conferences and support you in making it effective for the person that matters most, the adult at the centre. This video is a short version of a web-based 2022 IRIS resource, and you can find the link to that below. That's a longer learning tool that includes space for your own reflections and lots of extra information, so if you find this video useful, you may like to complete the full resource as well. The material in this video, just like in the full resource, was created in partnership with people who have personal and professional experience of adult support and protection case conferences. A multi-agency adult support and protection case conference is, in essence, about ensuring an adult who is not able to protect themselves gets the support that they need to stay safe. It's a meeting in which information relevant to concerns about harm or risk of harm is shared and considered. The case conference aims to assess risk and then make decisions on the actions that should happen because of this risk. When it's appropriate, a case conference will agree an adult protection plan or review a plan that is already in place. It's also important to view case conferences not as a one-off event. In this resource, you'll be encouraged to think about the before and after of a case conference, as well as what happens during them. There are important practical and emotional considerations when we think both about preparation and the outcomes of a case conference, and we'll be thinking about those as well. There is a legal context to case conferences. The Adult Support and Protection Scotland Act 2007 contains provisions intended to protect those adults who are unable to safeguard their own interests and who are at risk of harm because they are affected by disability, mental disorder, illness, or physical or mental infirmity. Set out in Section 3.1 of the Act is something often referred to as the 3-point test. Here, Wendy Taylor, a chair experienced in case conferences, explains what the 3-point test means.
We use the Adult Protection Case Conference to ensure we're having an application, or if more information is required regarding the 3-point test, which it comes under Section 3.1, which defines an adult at risk of harm. And that being an adult who is unable to safeguard their own well-being, property, rights or interests, and are at risk of harm, and because they're affected by disability, mental disorder, illness, physical or mental infirmity, they're more vulnerable to being harmed than adults who are not so affected. So the case conference gives us an opportunity to explore elements of that and to ensure that the 3-point test is being adhered to and that the person does meet the definition. Although these principles should always be applied, there are situations which can conflict with this, especially if an adult refuses to engage in the process or any intervention. But the professionals involved believe that an adult support and protection case conference will bring benefit to the person. In these situations, decision-making should consider all the principles and do so on a multi-agency basis.
To reiterate then, an adult at risk is defined as someone over the age of 16 who meets all of these criteria. Number 1, that they are unable to safeguard their own well-being, property, rights or other interests. Number 2, that they are at risk of harm. And 3, that because they are affected by disability, mental disorder, illness or physical or mental infirmity, they are more vulnerable to being harmed than adults who are not so affected. It is important to stress that all of the 3 criteria must be met. The 3-point test takes into account the whole of an adult's particular circumstances, which can combine to make them more vulnerable to harm than others. It's clearly stated in Section 1 of the Act that any intervention in an adult's affairs under the Act should, and this is a quote, provide benefit to the adult which could not reasonably be provided without intervening in the adult's affairs, and be the option that is least restrictive to the adult's freedom. This principle is likely to be met if you really seek to support the adult's participation in the case conference. It's only through building a good relationship with that person that you'll know about their skills and resiliencies, how they view the risk, and what their choices mean to them. You're now going to hear from someone who has been through the adult support and protection process in Scotland, and here she talks about how building trust and being respectful is central to all of this.
So it helps us to trust professionals when they give us accessible information and speak to us with the same respect they speak to everyone else with. I think it's important for professionals to realise that sometimes people make choices about their lives that you might not like or might not agree with, but as long as it's an informed choice and we've had proper support to understand the pros and cons, it is up to the person what they do. Trust is also built when professionals follow through on things they say they're going to do.
Iris has another video all about adult and carer participation in the adult support and protection system. It's called Working Together in Adult Support and Protection, and you might find it useful to watch that too. There is also a national adult support and protection resource called Good Practice for Effective Participation by the Adult in Adult Support and Protection Case Conferences that also looks at this topic in detail. A multi-agency adult support and protection conference is exactly that, a time when different perspectives are fundamental to keeping an adult safe. Research has consistently found that collaborative working and lots of different perspectives improve decision-making and planning in adult safeguarding. But it's not only that. People who know the adult well can help that person to feel that their opinions and choices are heard and acted on in a case conference. Listen now as a carer with experience of case conferences tells us why this is so important.
I think it's really important that a multidisciplinary approach is taken because people can have complex needs. And I think it is really important for, a range of different people to be around the table with different roles and remits, especially when that individual has multifaceted needs as well, because a lot of that can get lost in the system. If there's not enough people around the table that have a specialist interest in the area that you are looking for that support in.
The first people we need to think about at a case conference are the adult at risk and their representatives. If someone's life, choices and future are all being discussed at a meeting, they should have every opportunity to participate in that meeting. They may choose to do this by being there themselves, or by having a carer, family or friends supporting them, or by appearing on their behalf. They may also appoint someone to speak on their behalf, such as an advocacy worker. Advocacy means that the adult at risk gets support to express their views and wishes. Better knowledge of how advocacy works and the value it brings to the adult support and protection process is central to supporting the increased participation of adults at risk. It's always important, whether someone has an advocacy worker or not, to remember that processes and language that feel commonplace for professionals are likely to be unfamiliar to those who don't work within the system. Good preparation with an adult at risk and their supporters, explaining things, giving the opportunity to ask questions, checking accessibility needs, allowing time and flexibility, and then checking everything again are all key steps to supporting an adult's participation in a case conference. When it comes to professionals, a key attendee is the counsel officer. This is usually the professional who has led the adult protection investigation so far. While a counsel officer does not have to be a social worker, it is very common for social workers to undertake this role. Listen now to Louise Gilmore of Angus Council, who is a social worker and a counsel officer, as she explains her role and details the information a counsel officer would collect and analyse.
Under adult protection legislation, where it is known or believed an adult is at risk from harm and the council may need to intervene, the Act places a duty on the council to make the necessary inquiries to establish whether or not action is required to stop or prevent harm occurring. So this role is undertaken by what we call a council officer. So the council officer is defined by the Act as someone who's a qualified worker from either social work, occupational therapy, or a nursing background, who's registered with the relevant professional body, and they must have at least 12 months post-qualifying experience working with adults, and their role is to identify, assess and manage risk. So the role of the council officer is when an initial inquiry or a concern is raised into the team, the council officer would have a look at the referral and look to determine whether or not there may be signs there that the adult could be at risk. So you'll be aware from the previous information provided that we have what we call the 3-point test. So we would look at the 3-point test to determine whether or not the person would meet that. So as you'll be aware, the person has to meet all 3 points to be considered an adult at risk.
The case conference will also have a chair. At a case conference, it's important that everyone has a chance to speak, that discussions remain respectful, and that any differences of opinion are treated in an even-handed way. The chair will do all of these things. The chair is responsible for keeping the meeting on track overall and ensuring that everyone's voice is heard. This definitely includes hearing the voice of the person at risk and their representatives. If a crime has been committed, a police officer will also be invited to the case conference. They may also be invited in other circumstances too. The police play a critical part in safeguarding adults, both in their work on the front line and as part of ongoing adult support and protection processes. Like other professionals around the table, the police officer is there to share their professional perspective on the harm or the risk of harm and contribute their expertise to a positive outcome. A variety of health professionals might be at a case conference, including somebody's GP. The health perspective may be incredibly important because somebody's medical history or their current health status may affect their ability to keep themselves safe. An adult protection advisor, or APA, is a health professional who is a specialist in adult support and protection. Here, Susan Torrance, who is an APA at NHS Tayside, explains what she does.
So I suppose the main aim of our involvement in a case conference is to provide the health piece of the jigsaw puzzle, I suppose, which previously certainly in NHS Tayside it has not always been consistently present during a case conference. So we're aiming to provide a summary of health information for the adult at risk in terms of what's relevant and proportionate around their mental health issues, physical health issues, by carrying out, to begin with, a check of all the systems we can access around their health. And taking it from there, we might look at consulting people who are involved with the person or who can perhaps comment on the health issues that they're experiencing. If there's no key health professional currently involved with a person, such as say a a community mental health nurse. If there's nobody like that, then usually the APA will attend the conference and provide a summary of the key health information.
In addition to social work, health and the police, and depending on the circumstances, the case conference might have representatives from housing, mental health services, substance use services, fire and rescue, and the third sector. Potentially, there are a very wide range of people that may be invited to a case conference. It really depends on the needs and circumstances of the person. A case conference will always be minuted, meaning a minute taker will also be present, and the local authority may also ask their solicitor to be there at a case conference too. You may be thinking now, wow, that's really a lot of people. It's important to remember that lots of people at a meeting like a case conference can really feel intimidating to the person in whose interests the case conference is held. That's the adult at risk. In the National Service User and Carer Project, people with lived experience of case conferences said exactly that lots of professionals at the meeting can make it difficult to follow the process and feel quite stressful. One adult remarked that at their own case conference, there were multiple people from each organisation present. They said,
"Everybody had to go. I'm surprised they didn't bring their grannies. Everyone else was there."
If you find your organisation wants to send more than one representative, it's important to think carefully about the reasons for this. Are the reasons about the adult at risk or your own professional processes? If an adult support and protection case conference is truly to be centred on the adult at risk, then it follows that there is no single way to do a case conference. There should be an individualised approach, and each case conference will look slightly different depending on who is present, the wishes of the adult at risk, and the particular context of their situation. Nevertheless, as a case conference is a formal process, there are some elements that are common to most case conferences. In many cases, at the start of the meeting, there is a restricted section. This is to discuss legal, confidential, or third-party information and is minuted separately from the main case conference. Many people, including the adult at risk and their representatives, are not part of this section. After this, the main case conference will start. Watch now as Wendy Taylor, an experienced case conference chair, briefly introduces what happens at a case conference from a chair perspective. Note what she says about the restricted section and about keeping a consistent focus on the adult at risk participation all the way through the main part of the case conference.
The initial section is usually the restricted section to discuss third-party and confidential information and, where appropriate, what information requires to be shared with the person in the wider group. Following this, the person, the advocate, the family member, and anyone else who wasn't at the restricted section shall attend. I always introduce the person as soon as possible to try to provide reassurance and give them comfort in a difficult situation if there's any anxiety. It's important that the person and their advocate are informed, that they can make a request to clarify information or to request if they need some more time to consider what's been said and for them to understand this and the process. And this can be done by speaking up or in teams raising hands. If a person doesn't feel comfortable enough to speak up for themselves, they can let their advocate know and they can inform us of their needs. I always take time to advise why this meeting's happening, and I feel it's important to engage the person in a discussion as soon as we can to ensure their participation and provide them space to articulate their views and wishes. So it's especially important to focus on the risks and the purpose of this meeting, to prevent drifting into matters that are not relevant for the meeting or for it to turn into a case management discussion. So the role of the chair during the meeting and coming towards the end of the meeting is to sum up other people's views, sum up the risks and risk management actions to tackle those risks as the meeting goes along, and in conclusion, to be the action person, make sure the meetings are not just a talking shop and have a purpose and result in actions. To be the mediator, sometimes finding a compromise between two people or conflicting ideas. To be fair and not let your own feelings get in the way. To bring consensus and agreement around the risks and actions to be addressed, and to ensure and agreed outcomes and decisions adhere to the code of practice and that they're providing the best benefit to the person and to be the least restrictive options.
Later on in this video, as we move through what happens in a case conference, we will think about what the possible outcomes of that case conference might be. Preparation is essential throughout adult support and protection. Inadequate preparation prior to a case conference can be disrespectful, a source of frustration for others, and can mean that the best plan doesn't result. In contrast, when professionals are very prepared while remaining open-minded about what they might hear during the case conference, it means that the adult at risk and their representatives can feel a lot more confident in the process. A very important part of preparation is in helping the adult at risk and any person supporting them to prepare themselves. Participation isn't passive. People must be encouraged and supported, and this work begins before the case conference even takes place. Listen now to people who have been through the system themselves, either as an adult at risk or as a carer, and they will talk about what's helpful to them in preparation.
We want to know how many people to expect to be there, who would be attending, and what their role in the meeting would be. It's also helpful to have an agenda well in advance. We always say that the person should be able to speak first in the meeting, and they should to get independent advocacy, support so that they can prepare what they want to say for the meeting.
It helps to know information in advance. If we can have sight of agendas, what issues in our lives will be discussed.
I think having as much factual information and evidence as possible around legislation, policy and practice, and human rights is really important in that, as well as advocacy and key contacts. Now, fortunately, I work in health and care, so I was very aware of various legislation and knew who the key contacts were within health and care. But it does make me think, for those who don't have that information and those links, the only thing that I could suggest would be linking in with carer centres or a reputable and relevant peer support group, whether that's local or national. I think that would be helpful. But I think, sometimes it's just making sure that the information that you're linking in with is reputable and relevant, and it's from, a really safe source.
I'm a really organised person, so I do take notes for everything. My calendar and my phone is full of when I should order a prescription, absolutely everything, what I'm doing, when I'm doing it. So in my mum's case, I took lots of notes of the things that I wanted to ask. In my mum's case, because it was a criminal neglect meeting, I had photographs, a timeline, and all the things that I needed to gather my evidence together and have it noted, and actually sent it ahead of the meeting as well, so that they knew, made a PowerPoint and that. But so I suppose there's not a lot of people that are probably quite that way inclined, but I think like organisation of everything that you want to see, because it won't pop into your head at the time. So I think that you have to have all that in place.
You'll notice that advocacy was frequently mentioned as important in people's experiences. Listen now to Jackie of Partners in Advocacy as she discusses some of her actions in preparing herself for a case conference. Note how her preparation is very entwined with how she helps prepare her advocacy partner, which is the term advocacy workers use to refer to the adult they're working with, for the case conference.
So we contact the person. I would introduce myself, explain my role, and ask if they're happy for me to be involved. And if so, then I would ask them, is it okay for me to contact other people involved to gather some more information so that I could inform them of what some of the risks, the harms, the views of the people involved are, so that I can discuss it with them prior to the case conference. I will meet with the advocacy partner. I'll discuss all the information that I've got together. I'll contact the referrer, who's normally a social worker. I'll tell them that I've been allocated the case and that can I receive an invite to the case conference also. I also try to get more detailed information as to why adult support and protection measures have been applied, as some referrals can be quite limited in the information provided. I will meet with the person, and this will be somewhere that's comfortable for them. Normally it'll be in their home, or it'll be in a venue of their choice, a coffee shop or a library, or it's in hospital if the person is actually in the hospital setting, or a care home. I will contact the care home or the hospital. I'll arrange for a meeting to be arranged. And this is normally in a little visitor's room, or if they have a room of their own, but it's private so that there's no other people listening in. This is an opportunity also to find out the person's understanding of adult support and protection measures and why they have been applied. I provide information regarding this, so I'll tell them why social services are concerned. I'll let them think about it to see what their views are, how they perceive the situation, because sometimes the social work or the referrer's vision of what's happening is very different from the actually advocacy partner herself. So I will make sure that I have several meetings before there is a case conference, because it's very important to get a consistency. Also, it helps build up a relationship, a working relationship with the advocacy partner, and hopefully they see me as someone that they can trust to put forward their views.
There will also be some specific actions that every professional will have to take in order to prepare. In particular, the council officer will effectively have been preparing for the case conference throughout their investigation. Listen now to Council Officer Louise as she discusses some of the preparation work she undertakes.
We would do any relevant background information checks, and then we would arrange to interview the adult. We'd also interview any relevant family members, friends, professionals, any other interested parties, basically anyone that's got any involvement in the adult's life that might have any relevant information. We would speak to them prior to a case conference. We would then have the responsibility to complete a report, and that report would go to the chair of the case conference to be shared with anyone who's attending, and that really gives information regarding what the concerns are, what the risks are, what action has been taken so far, just so everyone attending has all the information that's required. And we would also prepare an invite list just to make sure that everyone who needs to be there is being invited.
All professionals will be expected to read and think about all the information they have about the adult at the centre of the case conference. This is because they will be expected to share and summarise the relevant information and provide their professional interpretation as to its meaning. This preparation work can be very active, seeking out information and conversations with other professionals, the adult at risk, and family and other important people. This will all help decision making and planning at the case conference. Finally, there are some practical considerations in preparing for a case conference. As well as a professional and emotional experience, a case conference is in itself a big meeting that requires coordination. There are decisions to make about where, when, and how it happens, as well as questions about who is invited and what happens if they can't come. The choice of venue can be particularly important. Transport and accessibility concerns are important to think about, but there are also more subtle issues at play. Listen now to Sandra, an out-of-hours social worker, as she discusses some of the possible issues when thinking about the venue for a case conference.
A venue that's convenient and familiar for some people might actually be outside of the comfort zone of others, and this could include the adult themselves. So this needs to be borne in mind, because this could be a barrier, an additional barrier for people attending or feeling comfortable in participating in the venue. If you feel like a fish out of water in the specific venue of the conference, bear in mind how likely is it that you would be able to participate fully and feel at ease during the conference. And if you're feeling like that, is it likely that others also might feel like that, and indeed the adult themselves? I'll give you another example. I have in the past participated in adult protection conferences that have been arranged in hospital venues or in surgeries, for example, in order to enable NHS staff, doctors and people like that to attend, because their time is obviously very precious. But that can have particular connotations for people, and we need to bear in mind and try and tease that out beforehand, so that we're aware and can put in place additional measures if possible to try and make it as easy as possible for people to participate and try and overcome those potential barriers.
As the case conference is about to start, nerves may be running high. While you might expect this to be true for the adult at risk and for their carers or supporters, this can also be true for professionals. Every case conference is different, and the things heard during it may be upsetting. The first thing to do is acknowledge that this can happen and make sure that you feel prepared for a potentially professionally and emotionally demanding meeting. Earlier in this video, we discussed the structure of a case conference. First, therefore, there may be a restricted section which the adult at risk, their advocacy worker and supporters do not attend. Listen to Jackie from Partners in Advocacy discuss how she helps the adult at risk try to understand why they haven't been invited into this part of the meeting. Note how she stresses a simple and sensitive conversation just so people do not feel that their circumstances are being discussed behind their back.
I help them understand the process and that they are unable to attend parts of the meeting. And usually this is a part of the meeting where there is disclosure of confidential information. And I think it's important that they're aware of this, that there may be information regarding a third party that we're not really privy to. However, normally in this case, I would ask the social worker or the senior social worker for some idea of what will be discussed in the confidential bit of it. If it's someone that is perhaps financially abusing the person or mentally or physically abusing, just a simple explanation like, we're going to discuss the other party involved in this case. But again, because it's confidential information. But hopefully my role is to help them understand this.
In the main part of the case conference, everyone who has been invited can now attend, including the adult at risk. It's important to set the tone of the meeting right from the very start. People who have been through case conferences where their own support and protection have been discussed stress the importance of respect, clear introductions and explanations, patience, listening, and attention to detail. You can now hear some of their insights into what helps people to feel comfortable.
I think this is probably something that will very much depend on the individual. Ideally, every person should be asked before their meeting what they'd want and what would make them feel most comfortable.
Proper introductions also are needed, so everyone's role and why they are there.
Pretty much all people with a learning disability have experienced the feeling of people kind of paying lip service to what you're saying. The difficulty is much more about whether people act on your wishes. It's less about whether they heard you or listened, and much more about whether their actions are in line with your wishes.
Eye contact is important. So people paying attention to what you're saying, people asking questions to clarify. It supports that people with learning disabilities are given the time they need to explain their views. So professionals can often assume they know what's best and assume they know our thoughts, rather than giving us the extra time we need to speak and make ourselves understood.
During the case conference, a lot of information, some of which may be very sensitive, is shared. This information will relate to harm and risk and be about how the adult can be supported and protected, including thinking about the strengths and positives in that person's life. Everyone attending a case conference is expected to share relevant information. This is something that's explicitly set out in the Adult Support and Protection Scotland Act 2007 and the accompanying Code of Practice. Good person-centred practice means discussing this information in a professional and courteous way. All those attending the case conference will treat the information discussed as confidential. Speaking from an NHS perspective, Susan, who is an adult protection advisor, now speaks about the importance of information sharing to promote the most informed outcome possible.
The key thing for us is making sure NHS staff know that there is a requirement to share information, whether or not they have a person's consent. So it's around really helping them see the benefits of the adult protection process, how sharing some information can perhaps open up supports for them that wouldn't otherwise maybe be there for them. So it's more about seeing how the process can benefit someone rather than seeing it as an obstacle that could affect a relationship.
In a case conference, when we share information, we need to be sensitive in how we do it. Words, phrases, and acronyms that are understood to mean something in a professional context may mean something else entirely outside of it. A good example is the phrase adult at risk. While professionals may know that this specific phrase relates to the 3-point test set out in law, non-professionals probably don't. Therefore, people might be understandably confused that someone is found not to be at risk when they don't see risk in these formal or legal terms. Sometimes difficult words and phrases are unavoidable. In these circumstances, it's important to explain why they are used, what they mean, and acknowledge that it might be upsetting to hear these words. Here, someone who has been called vulnerable and at risk explains how those words can feel and about the assumptions that can arise from them. When she speaks, it's a good reminder to us that when a person with learning disabilities is considered vulnerable, this is often not only about the immediate situation, but also as a result of how society has treated that person over a number of years.
These words are not a problem in themselves. It's when there's an assumption made that we're vulnerable or at risk of harm simply because we have a learning disability. That's the problem. People with learning disabilities are made vulnerable and put at risk of harm when They don't have good, accessible information made available. When we're sent to special schools and not given the opportunity to develop normal friendships and relationships, when we're expected to never have a romantic partner and so not included in normal sex and relationship education, that's when we become vulnerable, when we haven't been educated normally. But I suppose that answer will vary for every person going through the process, whether they're upset by those words, but not everyone with a learning disability will feel the same way. As long as professionals make sure people have had the support they need to understand and enough time to process what professionals mean with these words, it shouldn't be a problem.
Because all professionals will have a slightly different role at the case conference, their contributions will also vary. Each attendee will have their own professional priorities and processes, but there are some key principles that cut across everybody's contributions. Listen now as Sandra, who is an out-of-hours social worker, explains really clearly what makes a fruitful and sensitive case conference.
So everyone's contribution should be valued in an effective case conference. The critical issues need to be identified quickly and clearly. Any discussion should be productive and helpful. Participants are not left to wander off course and become counterproductive. I think we've all been in meetings where that has happened, and it's really not very helpful for everyone there, but particularly not helpful for the adult concerned. It's helpful when people speak only when they've something valid to contribute rather than just speaking for the sake of saying something. And again, we probably have all been at meetings like that, but it's really helpful to keep a conference as succinct and as focused on the issues pertinent to the conference as possible.
As this video has made very clear, every adult at risk will have their own unique context, personality, opinions and preferences. In addition to this, there are several other diverse circumstances that might be a factor to a greater or lesser extent at a case conference. There may be times when the adult at risk is still a teenager. However, if someone is over the age of 16, they will no longer be subject to child protection law, but instead be part of an adult support and protection case conference. Between the ages of 16 and 18, a young person is considered to be transitioning, leaving behind child and family support services and either ceasing using services altogether or beginning to use adult services instead. All young people experience some type of transition, for instance, transitioning from school to further education or employment. However, for young people with additional needs such as physical disabilities, learning disabilities, or those who have been in care, there may be transitions involving healthcare, education, disability support, income, the justice system, and child welfare. Research has found that this transitions process is generally experienced as very stressful for the young person. It's important to be aware of this wider context of transitions if a young person is part of an adult support and protection case conference. Here, Elaine, who is an advanced practitioner in adult support and protection, reflects on what is important to consider when a young adult is part of an adult support and protection case conference, particularly if a professional is unused to working directly with young people.
It's really important in adult support and protection that young people feel supported should they come to our attention. We want to ensure people who live in our communities feel supported and protected in the ethos of the legislation that supports our intervention. Professionals working with young people need to have an awareness of what it's like to be a young person and to understand the issues relevant to young people today living in our communities. To support professionals in doing this, we have dedicated council officer forums to discuss matters such as this and to look at ways in which we can further our learning. We also have a good relationship with our social work colleagues in child protection and share our learning on a regular basis.
Since both adult support and protection legislation and child protection guidance might be applicable to young people aged 16 and 17, it's important that those working in adult support and protection understand the experiences of this group of young people. For more information, you might find it helpful to look at Understanding Age in Child Protection Guidance and Adult Support and Protection Legislation, a publication from IRIS that you can access under this video. Chapter 4 of the Code of Practice discusses the need to make reasonable adjustments to support the adult at risk's communication needs. This can take many forms. For instance, someone may have a sensory impairment, use a communication aid, or speak English as a second language. Understanding how a person prefers to communicate and not making assumptions about this is an important first step in making sure someone is able to understand what is being discussed and to contribute their own views. It can also be the case that while some people are comfortable with a particular communication method in a one-on-one meeting, their needs can be very different in a larger meeting with lots of people that they don't know. People should always be asked what they prefer. The earlier that communication needs and preferences are established, the better. This will allow adjustments to be made and interpreters to be booked, all in good time for the case conference. It will also allow the arrangements to be checked with the adult at risk to make sure they're happy with them. Sometimes case conferences can take place via an online platform such as Zoom or Microsoft Teams. All the principles discussed through this video still apply in terms of a virtual case conference, such as person-centred meetings, attention to preparation, effective multi-agency communication, to name but a few. But there may also be additional things to consider when a case conference is held virtually. Technology is an obvious one. Disabled people, older people, and people on low incomes are especially likely to be unfamiliar or unconfident in using the internet and virtual meeting platforms. There are also worries that the whole picture is missing in virtual case conferences, such as the loss of body language or social cues, the loss of sensory and emotional information, and limits to what can be seen, as well as difficulties of knowing who else is listening in or is present. However, in some cases, a virtual meeting can be really positive. It can reduce travel costs, make someone feel more comfortable as they are in their own space, and really offer some control. For instance, someone can turn the camera off in order to have some privacy when upset. Sometimes the adult at risk does not want to attend the case conference, or in some cases their needs are such that it's very difficult for them to attend in person. Just as it's someone's right to attend a case conference, it's also their right not to attend. It may seem harder to keep the adult and their wishes and feelings at the centre of the case conference when they're not there, but it's still very important to do so. You can now listen to Jackie, an advocacy worker, talk about some of the reasons why someone might choose not to attend and how their voices can still be heard.
The advocacy worker, if requested, can attend in the person's behalf to make sure that their views and their wishes are heard by others present. I've been asked on numerous occasions to attend case conferences on an advocacy partner's behalf to put forward their views and wishes simply because they don't want to attend, they're afraid, they're angry, they don't like the interference in their life, and they feel betrayed, particularly if it's someone they know that has reported them, or they do not want to engage with social work or others involved. What we do as advocacy workers is we try to encourage them to come along and to speak up, to empower them. But I mean, not all people are comfortable attending such meetings, so we're quite happy to do it on their behalf.
At the end of the case conference, the chair will summarise the discussions that have taken place, bringing together the risks identified, along with protective factors, strengths and preferences of the adult at risk, and ask all professionals to give their opinion on these two factors. Number 1, whether the adult is at risk of harm, and if so, to agree a plan about what type of support and protection is needed. And number 2, whether the adult requires emergency protection. A decision may be taken to put an adult protection plan in place. This is a plan that sets out what needs to be done in order to support the adult to reduce the risk of any further harm. All the people who know and work with the adult will be involved in making the plan to keep the adult safe, and it will contain the person's wishes and feelings. This plan should stay in place until the adult is safe. An adult protection plan is based on the discussions and decisions made at the case conference and should cover any arrangements and supports already in place, people's respective roles in the adult protection plan, direct support for the adult at risk, and this may include advocacy or voluntary organisations, and any legal steps to be taken to protect the adult. This is called a protection order, and there are different types: an assessment order, a removal order, or a banning order. Here's a little more detail about these different types of protection orders. An assessment order is exactly what it sounds like. It allows a council officer to take an adult at risk to a more suitable place for assessment purposes. This is in order to allow either a council officer or a council nominee to conduct a private interview, or in some cases it may allow for a health professional to carry out a medical examination in private. A removal order also allows the council to remove the adult at risk to a suitable place, but unlike an assessment order, a removal order is primarily for protection purposes rather than to conduct an assessment. A removal order allows someone to be moved for up to 7 days and might be used when, for example, the place in which the adult at risk lives may be a contributory factor in the harm they are experiencing. A move like this may provide breathing space for that person. A banning order, or temporary banning order, is only granted where the adult at risk is in danger of being seriously harmed, and where banning the subject of the order from a specified place for up to 6 months is likely to safeguard the adult's well-being and property more effectively than with the removal of the adult at risk. There are lots of different conditions and circumstances attached to each of these codes, and this was just a summary. We recommend that you read more about them all in the Adult and Protection Scotland Act 2007 Code of Practice, and you can find the link for this below. The case conference and its outcome is always minuted by a specified minute taker. The minute taker doesn't contribute to discussion, but is alert to all that is said, records it, and distributes the minutes after a case conference. Minutes provide a valuable record that can be used for future reference, for example as evidence in legal proceedings. The minutes also allow everyone involved to reflect on what has been decided when they are away from the intensity of the case conference. Case conferences try to reach decisions by consensus. Reaching agreement by consensus doesn't mean that everyone has to like the decision or the plan that is reached, but it does mean that everyone will agree to abide by it. If, during the meeting, any agency refuses to abide by the plan, then this is a matter for the chair. Disagreements during the meeting are always recorded in the minutes. Following the case conference, if any professional believes that a decision puts someone at further risk of significant harm, then the usual process is to speak to their own manager. Heads of service may need to get involved in order to resolve disputes. As a final arbiter, a local authority's Adult Protection Committee, which is always chaired by an independent convener, can consider the evidence. Speaking up when, in your professional opinion, a case conference decision puts someone at further risk of harm is always important to do. An analysis of safeguarding adults reviews in England between 2017 and 2019 is clear that there can be serious consequences for an adult at risk if a professional does not speak up when they have serious doubts. The whole adult support and protection process, even when it is nearing its end or even completely over, is not always or usually going to be an easy time for someone. After a case conference, there may be new legal arrangements for someone to get used to. There may also be the loss of a previously valued relationship. When a case conference is over, an adult who has been at risk of harm may feel a whole range of emotions. You can now hear the voices of two people who have been through this system themselves as they explain what is important to them after the case conference has taken place.
It would possibly be useful to have a debrief immediately afterwards with your advocate, and possibly useful to talk it through again after a week or so when you have time to think. I think also maybe depends on what's been decided in the meeting. You will need very different support depending on what changes have been made to your life and whether you're happy about them or not. So once again, it's about speaking directly to the person involved at the time and making sure they get the support they decide they need.
We would want a copy of all documents and any decisions made in the meeting in writing. That means we can talk everything over afterwards with someone we trust in a more relaxed setting.
If you are continuing to work with a person, now is an appropriate time to help them move to the next stage of their life. You will have a good idea of their strengths and the things that they struggle with. What are their problem-solving abilities? What are they especially good at that you can encourage them in? What do they feel unsure about? What feelings might they like to talk to you or to someone else about? There are also a number of practical steps that professionals need to undertake, and these will differ in every situation. It very much depends on the type of adult protection plan that has been agreed upon. As an example, you can now hear from Susan. She works in NHS Scotland as an adult protection advisor, and here she explains what some of her responsibilities might be following a case conference.
I suppose there are several bits to that role. The first one really is making sure we have a record of the meeting having taken place, a summary of the discussion, the key themes, who was there, was the adult there, because I suppose they hopefully would be central to the discussion. The other element of things will be about the tasks, especially for health, whether it's a task for me to follow up on or maybe for one of my colleagues in health. So I'll be making sure that's recorded, but also taking that task forward. For example, recently, one of the case conferences as a follow-on, I've been trying to secure a neuropsychology assessment for someone. So I've been making links between the case holder, the council officer, and one of the specialists in neuropsychology to try and support that assessment process. I might also be supporting a health colleague, for example, to maybe take more flexible approaches to engaging with an adult at risk so that their health needs can be met.
Of course, the ultimate goals of a case conference and an adult protection plan are to keep that adult at risk safer. When people feel that they have choice and control over the plan and how it is implemented, rather than it is something being done to them, This helps keep them safer in the long term. Even though someone's confidence may be a low ebb right now and they might need a lot of support, don't forget about the hope that can build up with your encouragement. The fact that a plan is in place now and that their voice is being heard are all important things to build confidence and will support people keeping safer now and in the future. Our final clip about case conferences comes from Sandra, an out-of-hours social worker. She'll now give us a brilliant reminder about keeping the person at the centre of your case conference work at all times.
Just bearing in mind as well that if a case conference can be daunting and nerve-wracking for professionals attending, try and put yourself in the shoes of the adult concerned and see it from their perspective. And try and do that before you go to a conference. Just imagine what that would be like potentially for that person. You know, thinking about how people speak to that person. Is everyone making sure that the adult understands what is happening? We all have that responsibility.
In taking this work forward, you might now like to spend some time in quiet reflection and talk with your colleagues about best practice in case conferences. Don't be afraid to ask for hints, tips and strategies because these will all help you contribute to positive and effective case conferences. Thanks for watching this resource. If you wish to access the full online learning resource on case conferences in adult support and protection, you can find the link below. And good luck with your important work as part of the adult support and protection system in Scotland.